Various theories have been proposed over the years to explain the resurrection away. For example, maybe Jesus was somehow not fully dead and was resuscitated, or was merely unconscious having fainted and then he woke up. Or maybe they got the wrong tomb. But none of these have ever really stood up. In fact, the opposite. Philosopher William Lane Craig, a noted philosopher in our time, put his hand to investigating views on the resurrection. And he concluded that there was near universal agreement on the following four things by religious skeptics and believers alike. Firstly, Jesus did die and was buried by Joseph of Arimathea in his personal tomb. The four writers of the Gospels independently verify this. A multitude saw it. The writings of other historians from the time who weren't followers of Jesus also confirm the same. It's just not disputed. Secondly, on the Sunday, the tomb was found empty by the woman. Again, quite apart from Jesus' followers saying this, the Roman guards who were placed outside the tomb and the Jewish leaders of the day all confirm the same details in history. Thirdly, on multiple occasions in the days following, individuals and groups had experiences meeting with Christ. And this one's an amazing one. You see, it's recorded in the histories that many hundreds of people on various occasions claim to have seen Jesus again over a specific 40-day period after his death. And they were genuinely convinced of his resurrection as a result of talking with him, eating with him, traveling with him, and touching him. Now, to note it, my dad passed away a couple of years ago. And if he was to walk into this room here right now, I would be able to tell if it was or wasn't my dad. Those who knew Jesus, who had lived and traveled with him, including his mother and his brothers, were entirely convinced. And that tells us something. As another example of the kinds of evidences for the resurrection that exist, there's an early statement of belief or creed found in 1 Corinthians 15 about the resurrection of Jesus. The Apostle Paul says he received this creed from the disciples at Jerusalem 3 years after his own conversion. And Paul's trip is dated to AD 38, which therefore evidences a fully established belief in the resurrection prior to AD 38, which is already no more than 8 years after Jesus' death. And it's evidences like this that have led even scholars who don't believe in Jesus to concurrently accept that his followers did somehow have experiences that left them completely convinced. For example, Gerd Lederman, a leading German critic of the resurrection, he admitted, "It may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ." Finally, Craig says there is near complete agreement that the disciples believed what they had seen was Jesus risen from the dead. This is to say, they didn't think they saw a ghost or a dead Jesus visiting in his spiritual body. Instead, the physical Jesus had actually risen from the dead with wounds in his hands and his feet, and he was standing in front of them in a way that you could relate to and touch. Now, to note it, these are the same disciples who were so scared when Jesus was arrested and killed that they ran and hid. Now they're radically changed enough to even die for the claim that he's risen. And all history stands to tell us people do not die willingly for things that they know are not true. N.T. Wright, a British scholar and theologian, says of the evidence, "This is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him." The late Pinchas Lapid, a Jewish theologian who taught at the Hebrew University in Israel, similarly declared himself to have become convinced on the basis of the evidence that the Hebrew God of Israel had indeed, for some reason, raised Jesus of Nazareth from the dead. Because nothing makes any sense of the radical transformation of the disciples and others, who, to note it, go on to buy slaves in the slave markets to set them free, who care for the poor, selling even their own possessions to help them, loving others to an extent never before seen in history, and who then go and preach about the risen Jesus despite being hated and persecuted for that message and killed for the claim. Nothing explains it except that they were fully convinced. And these are some of the reasons Christians believe Christianity to be true. When we look into the details, who Jesus was claiming to be is clear. And the evidences, even for his resurrection, are so compelling that skeptics of Christianity now accept that all the witnesses of the risen Jesus were fully convinced they'd met and seen him somehow. In our next booklet, we're going to look at Jesus again, but this time to consider a specific and seemingly arrogant claim he made. Not to only be from God, but to be the only way to truly know God. That claim affects every person and religion, which is awkward. So what's the basis for believing that? We hope you're enjoying this series as we look at why Christians believe Christianity to be true.